Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordyn and welcome to the first video of my end of year content for 2023. I am so excited to start wrapping up my entire year of reading and start gushing about all of the books that I loved this year because there were a lot of them. If you are new to my channel, you might not know that I have an entire reading vlog series that I do featuring Book of the Month books. Not because they sponsor me, but because I am a regular member that really enjoys the service. And I especially love reading the books on camera and giving my reviews of books as I get them so that I can help other members of the service decide if they actually want to read these books, if they want to add them onto future boxes. It gives me a little bit of exposure to not only the most hyped and most popular books of the year, but also forces me to sometimes pick up books that I wouldn't otherwise and find some hidden gems. So if you do watch those videos of mine, you probably have seen a lot of these books already mentioned by me, but I wanted to do a full summary of my year of reading Book of the Month books and tell you my top 10 favorites that they have included in their service this year. A couple of caveats. First of all, I'm not including any of their December 2023 picks on this list. I haven't read any of them yet. I did pick one, but I haven't even received it yet. So if I end up reading that one and it becomes an all-time favorite, I will include it in next year's top 10 Book of the Month books video. But I wanted to be able to make this before waiting for that book. You get it. Also, the caveat that the books that I'm talking about have all been featured on Book of the Month. I have not necessarily read them all through Book of the Month. I might have read them as NetGalley arcs. I might have just bought regular finished copies elsewhere. A lot of them I did get through Book of the Month, but just wanted to say not all of them. Let's see, third caveat is that I am including not only their main monthly picks, but also any add-ons that they've had through it this year. I'm not sure why I feel the need to call that out specifically, but I do, so I am. And yeah, I think that's it. So let's get into first the really quick wrap-up portion for Book of the Month this year. From what I could find, it's a little bit hard to find all of their add-ons that they've included in 2023, but from what I can find, they have offered 96 books in total from January to November of 2023, and of those 96 books, I have read 22 of them, which is 23%. On one hand, that's not very many. Obviously, my top 10 selection is out of those 22 books, which is a small subset of all of the books that they've picked. So I can't possibly offer an objective opinion on the best books that they've selected this year. However, on the other hand, 23% is almost a quarter of their picks. And considering that every month each member technically gets in their base membership one book a month out of their 5 or more selections, I'm reading more than what's advertised. I don't know if I'm explaining this well. I don't know. I'm okay with 22 books being the number that I have read. As far as my ratings of the 22 books that I've read, 2 of them I DNF'd, 0 were 1 stars, only 1 was 2 stars, 8 were 3 stars, 3 were 4 stars, and 8 were 5 stars, which is actually also really good. This tells me a couple of things. One is that I do think Book of the Month selections are good. Almost every month I have at least one book that I am interested in reading. Some months I do end up skipping, but a lot of times I not only pick a main pick, but I also add an add-on. I also think this tells me that Book of the Month does align really well with my tastes in terms of genres. They almost always have a mystery thriller pick. I do also gravitate towards their contemporary literary fiction picks. I do have luck with some of their romance, and sometimes I even get a historical fiction out of them. So that's good. And then third and lastly, I think I've gotten pretty good at knowing my taste in books. And especially with a service like Book of the Month, I feel like I have the balance down of picking up the new releases that I'm really excited about and have already heard of, and also going out on a limb sometimes to try to find books that I haven't already heard of, but that Book of the Month is offering that I think I'm gonna like. I think my overall ratings show that that is successful. So with that little wrap up out of the way, let's get into the top 10 books. It wouldn't be me if I didn't even qualify this a little bit because I do have one honorable mention. I'll say all of my top 10 books are either 4 or 5 stars, but there is one 3-star book that I read that I just can't get out of my head. I keep thinking about it, so I wanted to mention it as a book that at the time I might not have been head over heels in love with, but I would ultimately recommend. And that book is Rootless by Crystal Zara Apaya. I definitely think this is one of the lesser known, underhyped books that I went out on a limb in selecting. It's a general contemporary fiction book about a married couple who is in crisis. Specifically, the wife is really unhappy. She's married to this guy. They have one child together and she's pregnant with another one. And mentally, she is not in a good place. So this is all about mostly her trying to work through that. It's very emotional, and I will warn that it does not end in a happily ever after, and definitely not a romance. So don't go into it expecting that. But if you think that you are in the mood for some heavy topics, emotional issues, this talks about the struggles of motherhood. There's mental health struggle in here. I remember it being very tough to read, but very emotionally impactful, thought-provoking, and again, it's lingered with me for a long time, which I think says a lot. So this is my honorable mention 11th favorite book of the month book from this year. Also, I forgot to mention, but I will link my playlist down below of my book of the month reading vlogs. So if you want to see any of my real-time reactions to these books for the ones that I got through book of the month, you can check them out there. All right, my number 10 choice is a late edition and very uncharacteristic of me because it's a fantasy book. I just read it this last month in November and I'm surprised I enjoyed it as much as I did. Definitely not an underhyped book. Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is a historical fiction fantasy book. I loved the historical fiction elements of it. This follows two rival journalists who are working at the same newspaper in like World War I England setting and time frame. But these journalists are rivals. They're competing for this columnist position. They've both got things in their past that are kind of haunting them. They end up finding these enchanted typewriters that they can write letters to each other and send them through their wardrobe. So there's a fun little like pen pal element to it. They end up going to the front lines of the war to do reporting on it, and a romance ensues, and also fantasy ensues because this war is a war between gods. And the ending of this book gets a little too fantasy for my personal preference, and like the cliffhanger ending and everything. I don't know. Will I read the second book? Yes, I will. But I loved this book for that wartime setting, historical fiction feel. I did like the romance between them. So I gave this one 4 stars. I would recommend it if maybe fantasy is also not your preferred genre. You've been seeing this book all around and you haven't been sure if you should pick it up. You can take it from me, a non-fantasy lover, that it is still worth a read if you like historical fiction romance type books. All right, number 9 is a thriller that has gotten very, very mixed reviews since its release. The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This is about a main character who is a writer. She applies to this very prestigious writing retreat hosted by one of her all-time favorite authors. She ends up getting accepted. She goes there. The twist, there's a couple twists to it. One is that this author, this famous author, is not exactly who she seems, and this writing retreat is a little bit more brutal than she signed up for. Also, when she gets there, she realizes that she's there with one of her ex-best friends, and she's gonna have to work through issues with her. This one is a wild ride. It's very different from other thrillers that I've read. It feels pretty dark in tone. There also are some queer, sexy undertones to it. So if that's gonna turn you off, I definitely want you to know that so you don't pick it up. But if you're looking for something different and something a little bit more in that, it's not quite romantic suspense, but there are some graphic scenes within it. It's almost a little bit fever dreamy. I don't know, it's weird, but I did ultimately enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars and I thought it was a fun time. All right, and now we are getting into 5-star books, which is kind of cool and I'm excited to talk about them. First one is a romance book that made some major waves when it was released earlier in the year. I am not alone in loving this book, but I did love it. It's Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I do apologize for the weird sunshine that's happening on these books. But this is an adult contemporary romance. It's technically the second in a series, more of a companion novel. You don't have to read the first one to understand this one. But it's about 2 doctors who work in the same hospital. This one also has a bit of a pen pal element to it now that I remember, so that's fun. but they initially get off on the wrong foot with each other, but once they start to understand each other's past and who they are, they make up and strike up a fake dating agreement. It's a lot of fun, but it's also very, very emotional. I do love Abby Jimenez in that she includes more emotional topics in her romances, but they don't get too heavy. She also has a lot of comedy. I really loved it, even more than the first book. I gave this one 5 stars, and if you for some reason have been putting it off, it's worth a read. All right, getting back into something a little bit lesser known, lesser hyped, a book that I recently read and really loved was The Leftover Woman by Jean Kwok. What can I do? Nope, that's not better. The Leftover Woman. This is a slower mystery type book, very reminiscent of Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. It follows 2 different women. The first is from China. She has recently moved to the US, and she is trying to locate her daughter, who she ended up basically being forced to give up for adoption. The daughter was adopted in America, so the mother moved to America to find her. And then the other perspective is a white woman who is a lawyer. No, she's a publishing executive, and she and her husband have adopted a Chinese child. So a lot of talk about motherhood, what it means to be a birth mother versus an adoptive mother, also the cultural implications, and what happens when these 2 women intertwine. Loved it, came out of it with no complaints, gave it 5 stars, and would highly recommend if that synopsis sounds interesting to you. All right, book number, let's see, 6. My second favorite thriller from Book of the Month this year is, maybe to no one's surprise, The Only One Left by Riley Sager. I know that so many of us on the Riley Sager train have been up and down with all of his last releases. I'm very happy that this one was a win for me. This is about a woman who is a caretaker. She is taking care of this older woman who lives in this mansion named Lenora Hope. And Lenora Hope is infamous for allegedly killing her entire family when she was a child. Maybe not a child, 17 years old. Was never convicted or anything, but has basically lived alone since then. Nobody knows what really happened to her and her family, and this caretaker is finally getting the story out of her. Again, a pen pal element. Lenora is telling the story to the caretaker through a typewriter, so that must be something that I really like in books. Not just romances. I thought it was really fun in the thriller genre to be getting a story told through a typewriter. In typical Riley Sager fashion, there are twists upon twists within this book. I loved them all. I love a wild ride. I loved the cliffside setting that this mansion is set on. I loved it all. I gave it 5 stars. All right, getting into the top 5. Number 5 is my highest rated thriller, which is kind of interesting. Thriller is my most read, and I often say my favorite genre, but I don't think it has the most long-lasting emotional effect on me, so probably why they don't end up being all-time favorites. But still, I do love a good thriller. Like I mentioned, I like a fast-paced, wild, twisty thriller, which this one is. I do not have a Book of the Month copy because I ended up getting an ARC from the publisher before this came out. So that's what this copy is, and it is The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I loved this thriller so much. It was so fun. This is about a woman who is house sitting for someone in a very remote location. She's isolated, she's by herself, she loves to read, so she's reading books, hanging out with her dog. When she reads a book and ends up giving it 1 star, she writes a review for it and then gets a response from the author who doesn't agree with her low rating of his book. They get in a little bit of an argument, and the next thing she knows, she thinks someone is potentially in this house with her or is trying to get in, and she's wondering, could it be that author coming after her? So fun. Heart pounding. Again, loved the setting. I don't think I have anything really super coherent to say about this book, but I did love it. All right, please hold while I try to take care of this window situation. Okay, that's better. All right, my number 4 book, I actually don't have a physical copy of. That's because I read this book as an ARC through NetGalley. So I read the ebook. I do have it on my Amazon wish list, and someday I plan to buy the physical copy. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But that does not negate my love for this book, and that's Stars in Your Eyes by Kaysen Callender. This book was so good. This is an adult contemporary romance between 2 men who are actors in Hollywood. They are kind of opposites. One is like the bad boy of Hollywood. He's been in some scandals recently. He has a not great reputation, and he's hoping this movie will clean up his image a little bit. And then the other one is a rising star within Hollywood. He's the good guy, new kid, trying to get his big break. They are starring in this movie together, trying to get along. They also end up having to basically force a relationship or stage a fake relationship to promote the movie. And not only does it follow them through the process of making this movie together and forming a relationship, but it also follows them for many years afterwards, which is not always my favorite trope in a book, but I did really enjoy it in this one. It gave us so much time to get to know these characters and their flaws and let them work on those flaws. They are by no means perfect people, and I love romances between characters that are not perfect. They challenge each other, they have to work through things as individuals and together. I really loved it. I don't think it's getting quite as much attention and love as it deserves, so please, if it sounds interesting, pick it up. It probably goes without saying, but again, I gave it 5 stars. Okay, and then getting into the top 3 book of the month books that I read this year. This next one is also a surprise because I thought it was fantasy, so I put off reading it forever, even though I saw overwhelmingly amazing reviews for it. I didn't think it was for me. I'm not sure exactly what compelled me to pick it up, but I'm so glad that I finally did. It's The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. And I will be the first to tell you, this is not a fantasy book. So if that has been putting you off from picking it up, know that it's not that, and I'm so glad it's not because I loved it exactly for what it is. This is a really fun, whimsical, yet also emotional contemporary book about this woman who is a teacher. She's a little bit down on her luck. She's barely scraping by. She's trying to save up every penny that she can because there's this boy at her school who is in foster care, and she's gotten to know and is an orphan, and she wants to adopt him. So she's trying to save up money to be able to do that. And part of her relationship with this boy is they read books together. She has introduced him to her childhood favorite book series. They read it together. It's adorable. And the author of that book series hasn't written in many years. Nobody really knows why. And all of a sudden, at the start of this book, this main character gets the opportunity to participate in a competition to win the rights to that author's newest book. So she's super excited, not only because it's her childhood favorite author, but also because this could be her ticket to raising money to adopt this boy. Very heartwarming and fun, but what's extra special about this book is the island that it's set on is called Clock Island. It is such a fun setting. And maybe that's why this book is getting kind of marketed as fantasy, is because this feels like it could be a fantasy land, but it's not. There's nothing magical about it. It's a real, quote unquote real, it's fictional, but it's a realistic island that is just whimsical and fun. We see the games. I really like the riddles that are included in here and having been able to like solve them along with her. It's just fun, and it's heartbreaking, and it's heartwarming. It's all the things I love in books. It definitely caught me by surprise how much I loved it. Despite all of the positive reviews, I still didn't know that I was going to enjoy it as much as I did, but I am so glad I did. I'm glad I could be part of the hype, and again, hopefully recommend it to people that maybe it's been mismarketed to or have been a little bit hesitant to pick it up. I do think it's well worth all of the love and praise and reading. All right, my number 2 favorite book is another contemporary romance. Not sure who I am this year, loving so much romance, but I'm here for it. This next book is definitely not an underhyped author, but I have seen mixed reviews on this book after it came out, and I'm here to give it my best pitch. It's Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. This is another STEM romance. I love this type of book. 2 characters who work in STEM. This one is about 2 physicists. I don't remember all of the details about how exactly their relationship comes to be, but I remember that I loved it. I do remember that the woman, in order to support her endeavors in academia, also works as a fake girlfriend on this app. And I think what happens is she is being the fake girlfriend of this main character's brother. So they meet each other through that when she's pretending to be this guy's brother's girlfriend, but then also they meet again because she is applying to work under him as a physicist. and so she has to come clean about who she is. I don't know. All I remember is loving the STEM humor in this book and also loving the discussions about politics in STEM academia, which might not be everybody's cup of tea, and that is fair enough, but it was mine. I ate this up. I loved the romance, I loved the science, I loved the humor, like I mentioned. It was like the perfect little concoction for me. So I gave it 5 stars. It's my favorite Ali Hazelwood book to date and pretty much solidifies that I will probably read anything that Ali Hazelwood puts out in the future, especially in the adult romance genre. It was great. I don't have anything else to say. 5 stars. All right, and then with that, that brings me to my #1 favorite book selected by Book of the Month in 2023. This is another one that I read through NetGalley originally, and then I had to order myself a physical copy. I ended up getting a signed copy of the book through an independent bookshop, so I didn't get it through Book of the Month, but I wanted a special copy of it because this will definitely be showing up on my overall top 10 favorite books of 2023. Very near the top, if not the top. I don't know, I haven't fully decided yet, but this is one of my all-time favorite books. As of this year, it's Happiness Falls by Angie Kim. While this was not featured in a Book of the Month reading vlog, I did feature it in an ARC reading vlog, so I will link that below if you want to see my thoughts in the moment of reading this. But like the last book, this was just the perfect book for me. As I was reading this book, I just kept thinking about savoring the experience of reading it because I knew it was a special book, I knew I was gonna love it, and I didn't want to be done reading it because I was having the best time. This is a contemporary mystery book about this family whose father goes disappeared. That was not a sentence. The father of the family disappears, and the only person who saw what happened is the son, but the son has autism and Angelman syndrome and is non-speaking. So even though he knows what happens, he can't verbally communicate it, so nobody else knows what has happened to the father. And this story is about the solving of that through the eyes of the daughter of this family, whose mind works so similarly to me that it was so fun to read. She can't get a sentence out without relating what she's talking about to something that happened in her past and qualifying her thoughts with her reasoning behind the thoughts. Not sure if you'll be able to see it, but there are footnotes in the book with her expanded thoughts on certain topics. She was a super fun main character's head and perspective to be reading from. More fun shadows. I also love that this covers the topic of happiness, the idea of happiness. The father in this family was, I can't remember, a scientist or a psychologist or something who studied the idea of happiness, and the main character finds his journals. I found those parts fascinating, and basically the dad was kind of experimenting on his own family to understand the happiness quotient and how you can change somebody's expectations of an event or prime their expectations differently. He was doing this to his children to see if that had a different effect on their happiness after something happened. So the main character is also kind of grappling with this new understanding of what her father was doing to them. I don't know. I don't know if there's a great way to pitch this book to encompass all that this book encompasses. I think I'll just wrap it up and say that this book was perfect for me. I loved the writing style. I loved the main character. I loved the solving of the mystery. I love the additional elements that were included. I also didn't even talk about how this is a Korean American family, so there are some social issues covered in here. It's just complex but not confusing, and I loved everything about it. So, though mine is not a Book of the Month copy, if this book sounds interesting to you and you're a member of Book of the Month and you want to add it onto a future box, I would highly, highly recommend it. But obviously that is not the only place to obtain this book, and I would give this as just a general recommendation to read this book however you can and want to. I loved it so much. It is my favorite book that Book of the Month selected in 2023. 2023. And those are my top 10, technically 11 book of the month books of this year. It was surprisingly difficult to narrow down that list and put them in order. So let me know your thoughts. Have you read any of the books that I mentioned, and do you agree with my opinions? What were your favorite books from Book of the Month this year? If you're a member, or even if you're not a member, you're free to chime in on any of the books that you've seen they've had as picks. I would love to hear. I would love to get recommendations. My membership is not going anywhere, and my Book of the Month vlogs are not going anywhere, so look forward to the same type of content in 2024. Other than that, I don't think I have anything else, so thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.